I think it's also at that point that you look at each other and actually the why me and the guilt begins.
Oh, the why me, yeah. I had lots of why me moments, and they lasted for years, the why me's. Occasionally I had them. They got less and less as time went by. But and the guilt, I felt guilty. Was it something I did? Was it something I ate? Did I do something wrong in pregnancy?
I think both of us would say that we went through every single stage of our lives, everything we'd ever done right, wrong during Sarah's pregnancy, or otherwise to try and find a reason what had caused this. And of course, you start off thinking, fine, your daughter has dysmorphic features, I'm sure this is curable, I'm sure it will go away. And it takes a very long time to realize that perhaps this will never go away. And it takes a very long time of being bumped around hospital services, going to endless tests if your child is blind, deaf, dumb, able to walk, not able to walk. Endless blood samples are taken, endless samples from you are taken, only to reach a magnificent conclusion after about 3 or 4 years. There is no known syndrome, but your child is never going to catch up. She's never going to be normal, but we can't actually tell you what a prognosis is.
I didn't understand any of the jargon. I didn't understand what he was talking about. I would think I was just a bit shell-shocked as well. I think I didn't listen to anything except the word handicapped. The word handicapped hit me, and the rest was just, sort of a blur really at that point, because we didn't know at that point how severely disabled Guy was going to be.
I suppose with everybody, when their child is told they have disabilities, if you can't actually see the disabilities, you hope they're going to grow out of them. And because Amy didn't actually have a diagnosis as such, it was a developmental thing. And I'd already been reassured by X number of people, she'll walk in time, she'll talk in time. You think, well, maybe she's just a few years behind everybody else. And in being a few years behind everybody else, she'll catch up. That one day she'll suddenly realise that words form sentences and she'll talk, and that she'll be as able as the others in her walking and her running. So yeah, I suppose I was in denial at the time. I was just expecting that eventually she would be like the other children were and join in with the other children.
I think it's immensely difficult for other family members. I think it's very difficult for your friends to know how to react. Of course, there's a great deal of sympathy. There's a great deal of don't worry. There's a great deal of positive, but really not very helpful advice. And a great deal of people who know someone who could possibly look at this. So you're being bombarded by goodwill and good intention. But the reality is, you've got to get on with it.
I didn't want her to go to the local special school, which took all the local children. I felt that perhaps there was still a switch to be switched on, and that she would come out of this.
Christopher, we had an awful lot of visits with very different eminent paediatricians from the very beginning, none of which shed any light as to what his problem was, other than they gave it that generic term of global developmental delay, but we didn't know what that meant or where he was going. That, in the very early days, they would say things like he's never going to walk. They would do little things like test his hair in a very sort of abrupt way, as though it was a doll or something, and say, his hair's very dry, that might mean something. Has your mother and your grandmother got a grey bit of hair at the back of her head on her right temple, and all these. So they were desperate to find clues as to what was going on, but nothing was really emerging.
Guy was 15 months old when he was given a diagnosis of Angelman syndrome. And we'd already been told at that point to take him home, and he was completely normal about 2 months before. And they'd done a blood test, which tests for Angelman's, apparently, but they hadn't done the right type of test, so it hadn't shown up.
One of the things you always hope for when you discover that your child has a serious disability, in a strange way, you actually want to know what it is. You want to know what it is because you want to be able to plan the future. And if you don't know what your disability is, then you have absolutely no idea what the future will hold. And we still have no idea what the future will hold. So we don't know if Georgia will live till she's 25 or 85. And that's always going to be a concern that hangs over us one way or another.
He was 8 by the time we found out what was wrong with him. He was under a geneticist at Addenbrooke's who would take bloods perhaps once a year and run loads of tests. We said, do whatever you like with them, run as many tests, do what you like. We don't need to know. You just go away and do your job and let us know if you come up with anything. And we never really worried if they were going to find out or not either. It never seemed to really concern us. But then the geneticist did phone and said they'd got the results through. And we were just really excited, actually, that they'd found it. And there was a lovely photograph. I remember going into our office and there was a lovely photograph of my son's chromosome 9, and with a little blue dot saying, this is the bit that's missing. And this is the reason Christopher is like he is. And you think, all that genetic data that he's carrying and that tiny pinprick is the result of so many issues and problems. But then she said, it's not genetic, it's something that's formed in Christopher. So we were relieved because I'd got my brother whose partner was expecting, so I just needed to know it wasn't something within the whole family. And once we were reassured, we went and had a champagne lunch.
I can remember crying a lot and not really listening to much of what he said. Bob was much more composed. He was completely ashen and sort of holding my hands. And I think I just went into meltdown. I think I just went into a complete state of shock. And it was that horrible sort of numb feeling, like the same sort of thing you're told when someone you love has just died. The same sort of feeling, I think, at that time. And Bob asked lots of questions and wanted to know, thankfully, because I wasn't in a position to ask any questions at that point. And he asked more to try and get more information. But we were only there for 15 minutes. We only spent 15 minutes in the consultant's office, and we weren't given any. We were given very minimal information about the condition, and we were in such a state of shock when we left, we couldn't even remember the name of the syndrome.
The assumptions I made from very early on that once I was under this eminent paediatrician, all this wonderful support would fall into place, and suddenly I'd have health visitors knocking on my door offering me support and occupational therapy. I mean, obviously I didn't know anything. It's not, when you're a mum and you have this disabled child, it's not innate. You don't know what to do like you do with a normal child. You need help, because I didn't know where to go and I didn't know who was out there to go to. And obviously nothing was coming knocking at my door, and he was nearly 18 months, and I was very much at home on my own with him and his sister.
We had to reach breaking point before we got any help, I think, at that point. And it was only when we were threatening to give him up or saying, hand him over, you do it, I can't do it anymore, was the only time we got the support we needed. And even then it wasn't enough, really. It was just that one night a month. Eventually that increased. So as time went by, we got more and more respite, and we were very lucky that we ended up with about 4 or 5 nights a month, which is considered a very excessive package of care. But it was enough to keep Guy at home with us until he was 16.
I think the biggest challenge we've had raising Harry is working with professionals, to be honest with you. He's actually the least of the problems in lots of ways, because as a mum and a dad, you get to know your child and you get to know what they're good at, what they need help with, what helps them move on. Our biggest problem was trying to explain what his needs were to professionals who should have known what his needs were, or we thought they should have known, and not agreeing. And we had a lot of trouble around things like the right education. He was in a school for children with severe learning disabilities, which was a very good school for children with severe learning disabilities, but it didn't address the fact that he is actually autistic.